that I may dwell in your house forever, lifting up your name. Dwell in your house forevermore, that I may dwell in your house forever, lifting up your name. Dwell in your house evermore. I'll dwell your house forever, lifting up your name. Dwell in your house forevermore, evermore. Oh. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution Scriptures. And we want to talk about the stone of stumbling today. We're going to talk about behaviors that cause other people to stumble. All sorts of juicy goodies here today. We're in the life of David, remember? King David now. And let's get straight into it because we've got quite a bit of writing. It is fitting that the issue of the temple is what our last chapter, that's 2 Samuel chapter 7 in our last video. It's fitting that that's what our last chapter was built around, because the point for David in wanting to build Yahuah a house was how to ensure Yahuah's presence stayed with him at all times. This is what he wanted. I mean, these are primitive, dark times, and they didn't really know much about the supernatural or Yahuah, but David knew this much. How can I build a house that I can keep Yahuah here all the time? I want him all the time. How to ensure Yahuah's presence stayed with him at all times. So while Yahuah was essentially responding to David's request by explaining that he had no need or want for a fancy earthly dwelling place, and that his natural mode was to travel with his people, David was still thinking in terms of building a stone and cedar wood dwelling for Yahuah. In fact, and David probably didn't get this point at the time, but Yahuah made it quite clear that even though he would allow a son of David to build a temple, Yahuah himself would not be stuck in there, in the set-apart place, like a bird in a cage or a genie in a bottle. No, not like mankind thought of their deities. No way, son. This was merely a house to rest his name upon. We dealt with that in our last episode, and I thought that was fascinating. He wasn't in the tabernacle, in the temple. Small portion of him was, a small part, just enough to keep the camp warm, keep the camp clean, full of life and purity. They couldn't come too close, of course, otherwise they'd get frackled up, but just enough of him was there. Just a little drop in this dimension is enough to light up the place. But it was predominantly a place where he rested his name. The tabernacle, the temple, us. Do you really believe you have the full essence of the Almighty Creator of the universe inside you? No way. If he came through into this dimension, everything, including us, would be frackled up, because we're not perfected yet either. We only have a small drop, a small down payment of him inside us. And of course, the main point is that we are the dwelling where he rests his name. Yeah? What do we get when we come out of the water of immersion? His name written upon our forehead. We are the place where he chooses to rest his name. So in retrospect, we can see the blueprints and the patterns for a whole series of revelation that would come in the future. One of the main ones being that Yahuah dwells in another dimension called 𝗕𝗪𝗡, not on earth, and he cannot be housed in a building made by men. Way after David's time, Yahuah will make his presence available not only to priests and royalty, but to all people who trust in him, and they won't have to go to a specific place to visit him and worship him, because he will travel with them. He will travel with them and be with them wherever they are, and they will worship him through their daily behavior of clean obedience. That's where we're up to in the prophetic history, guys. This is where we're up to now. In our last episode, David was dealing with those subjects, building a house And Yahuah is saying, no, I want to be able to travel with my people. And of course, one day I will live in them as he does today. Can we modern day believers comprehend just what a radical notion that was? What the Israelites thought regarding where deities live and how deities interact with the nations in their charge was generally the same thoughts that their idol-worshipping neighbours had. They thought about Yahuah the same way their neighbours thought about their idols, as far as how to house them and how to keep them territorial. So whatever way David pictured Yahuah always being present with his people on earth is certainly not what we know today to be the case. In 2 Corinthians, what agreement can there be between the temple of Yahuah and idols? You're feeling a conflict, you're feeling a misery, you're feeling a chastising or a flogging, feeling just that general sense of misery within you. What agreement can there be between the temple of Yahuah, of which we are, and idols? Idolatry being worldly behaviour, wicked behaviour, wrong, un-Turah behaviour. There can't be. That's the turmoil you're going through. For we are the temple of the living Yahuah. As Yahuah said, I will house myself in them, and I will walk among you. I will be their Elohim, and they will be my people. So way back here in David, he's talking about the kind of reign, because these are the books of the kingdom, books of the reign, talking a lot about his reign, the ark, and now we know that that portal is on our hearts. Yahuah will not be confined to a house of wood and stone, but will travel with his chosen people. And this was wonderful, and because Yahuah will house himself in his people, no separation from him can occur, unless we do it, because he's within us. In other words, if Yahuah permitted himself to be housed inside a temple building, then he was, by definition, separated from his people, unless they journeyed to that temple. But not so if he lives in us. Yeah? Romans 8, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither messengers, principalities nor powers, neither present nor the future, height nor depth, or any other creature can separate us from the love of Yahuah, which comes to us through the Messiah Yahushua, our Master. None of those things, nothing can separate us from the love of Yahuah. Yahushua's blood bridged the dimensional gap between heaven and earth. That is why we can have relationship with him now and not have to go through all that temple sacrificial system, cutting up animals and no thanks. Yahushua's blood did all of it. There's now no separation. Now David did not comprehend all this, nor did he comprehend how it could be that his descendant would rule over Yahuah's people forever. Because in its simplest sense, this meant that his mysterious descendant would have to live forever. But David did understand that what Yahuah was proposing was beyond anything that a man could imagine or bring about. And so David believed Yahuah. So that's just a little bit of a recap of our last episode, dealing with the house. Yeah? David wanted to build Yahuah a house. Yahuah said, no, I will make the house, thank you very much, and I will live in it. So we're going to come into stumbling today. Sometime later, David won a great victory over the Philistines, gaining superiority over them at Metheg-Ammah, in other words, Gath, the mother city of Philistia. He also defeated the army of Moab, and, making the captured lie down, he determined that 2/3 of them would be put to death, while 1/3 of them would be allowed to live. And as a result, the Moabites became servants of David and paid tribute. Interesting though. Look here. What about this mass execution in Moab? Because look up here. 2/3 of them will be put to death. The military. What about this mass execution in Moab? They'd been on friendly terms with David and his family in the past. The king of Moab even agreed to let David's parents and family live there, protected, while David was on the run from King Saul, remember? Even more, David's ancestor Ruth was from Moab, So there was a family connection there too. Moab must have seriously offended David. So he concluded that unless Moab was greatly weakened, they would not be controllable. And the most expedient way to weaken a nation has always been to diminish their army. That's what he did. Made them all lie down. And there's a measuring cord. 2/3 were executed, 1/3 were allowed to live. David also defeated ● the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, in southern Aram, when ● went to restore territory all the way to the Euphrates River. So he defeated him when he went to restore all the territory's way to the Euphrates River. David captured from him 1,700 charioteers and 20,000 foot soldiers. He retained enough horses to drive 100 chariots and disabled the rest, cutting their leg tendons. Disabled all these horses now. Part of David's aim was to extend Israel's dominion to the Euphrates River, since it was promised to Abraham in Genesis 15. Remember that? That was where Yahuah gave Abraham the borders of the promised land. So he, David, confronted the nations of that region who had no intention of becoming part of a greater Israel. And a fellow named Hadadezer was the general of the army from the nation of Zobah, a nation located near Damascus in Syria. This army of Hadad had many horses and chariots, and they were all captured by David's forces. But David, who was aware of Yahuah's instructions from Deuteronomy 17, kept only sufficient horses to operate 100 chariot teams, and he hobbled the remainder. Looking at the patterns again, David knew the patterns, David knew the instructions. In Deuteronomy 17, in that event you must appoint as a king the one whom Yahuah your Elohim will choose. He must be one of your kinsmen. This king you appoint over you. You are forbidden to appoint a foreigner over you who is not your kinsman. However, he is not to acquire many horses. This was the point. He is not to acquire many horses for himself, or have the people return to Egypt to obtain more horses, inasmuch as Yahuah told you never to go back that way again. I don't care what you need from Egypt. You're not going back there again. Yeah? Do not go back to Egypt. Message for us. Do not go back. A dog goes back to its vomit. When the Arameans came from Damascus to fight alongside King Hadadezer of Zobah, David killed 22,000 of their soldiers as well. 22,000. Then David set up outposts among the Arameans from Damascus, and they became servants of David and paid tribute. Then Yahuah helped David, delivering him wherever he went. Yahuah was helping David, delivering him wherever he went. David brought the gold shields that had been carried by Hadadezer's men back to Jerusalem, and he plundered a vast quantity of bronze from Hadadezer's towns too, Betah and Berotah. No doubt these precious resources would later be used to construct the Temple of Solomon. So he was starting to store up these treasures because he had a plan to build a house. Even though Yahuah had said no, he was planning it. And as we know, eventually his son got to build it. When King Toi of Hamah in southern Aram heard that David had defeated Hadadezer's army, he sent Joram to greet King David and to congratulate him on his victories, because Toi had also defeated Hadadezer. Joram brought as gifts items of silver, gold, and bronze, which David dedicated to Yahuah, as he had all the silver and gold he'd received from those nations he defeated: Aram, Moab, Ammon, Philistia, and Amalek, including the spoils from Hadadezer. And David's exploits greatly improved his reputation in Israel. After his return, he went to war with the Edomites, killing 18,000 in the Valley of Salt. 18,000. Then he set up outposts throughout all the land of Edom and all the Edomites became his servants too. And Yahuah helped David, delivering him wherever he went. In other words, he travels with his people, not confined to a gold chest. Yeah? So this is twice in the same chapter. It says, Yahuah helped David, delivering him wherever he went, delivering him, rescuing him, protecting him wherever he went. So, David was finally king over a united Yisrael, ruling all his people in righteous justice. And remember, David knew, he must have been sussing out the Turah a bit, seeking it out. So he was conquering all these borders that were given to Abraham. He was conquering them, yeah? He wanted his promised land. So this is the testimony, this is the account of all the foreign nations that he was still booting out and slaughtering. Joshua was supposed to have done it, but he didn't do it properly and he ran out of time. And then Yisrael wasn't interested after a while. So, where are we up to? This point here, David is finally king over a united Yisrael, ruling all his people in righteous justice. Let's talk about these few little points here. David ruled over a united Yisrael. This was huge because, except for brief periods of time, Yisrael was always divided into two main camps, Judah and Yisrael, or, as it was called a few years after King Solomon's death, Judah and Ephraim. Yes, David ruled over all the tribes of Israel that are now formed into a single sovereign nation. And this had not happened since the days of Moses and Joshua. So this is monumental what's happening here. David achieved something that had not been done since Moses and Joshua's time. Sadly, although David's son Solomon would inherit this arrangement and even improve upon it, within a matter of 3 or 4 years after Solomon's death, Yisrael would fall back into civil war and dissolve again into its age-old tribal coalitions that primarily consisted of the 10 to the north, Ephraim, and 2 to the south, Judah. So, that's just to explain that he's now king over a united Israel as a whole. The other main point was that he's ruling. What's his behavior? He's ruling in righteous justice, something that none of the judges really did properly. Samuel ruled in righteous justice. Here is the appearance of a pattern that was instructed in the Turah. Deuteronomy 16, you are to appoint judges and officers for all your gates in the cities. Yahuah your Elohim is giving you, tribe by tribe, and they are to judge the people with righteous judgment. You are not to distort justice or show favoritism, and you are not to accept a bribe. For a gift blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of even the upright. Justice, only justice, you must pursue, so that you will live and inherit the land Yahuah your Elohim is giving you. That's the instruction for leaders in Deuteronomy 16, and you can see that David is meeting this requirement. Here in Deuteronomy, we see the phrase righteous judgment, and it's in the form of a commandment that Israel's civil authorities are to rule by, adhering to this underlying premise. Deuteronomy 16 even goes so far as to define righteous judgment by saying that there is to be no favoritism or distortion of justice and no accepting a bribe to predetermine an outcome. And this is what is being ascribed to David's rule. This is what they're saying about David here. Notice also the final words that say David applied this righteous justice to all the people. He applied this behavior to all the people in Israel. Now, all the people there is not referring to social classes, rich or poor, whatever. No, this is not referring to social economic classes, but rather David did not show partiality to his own southern tribal group coalition of Judah over Saul's old coalition of northern tribes. So he wasn't showing favoritism to the guys down the south because they were his tribe. No, he was treating everybody equally and fairly. So David is now king over a united Israel, and he rules in righteous judgment. Righteous judgment, which is Mishpat Zedek. Not Melchizedek, which is king of righteousness. Mishpat Zedek, which is righteous judgment. This is the king. This is the shadow of Yahushua, remember? This guy. So, this is his administration. Joab, the son of David's sister, Zeruiah, was King David's general. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was his recorder. Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, served as high priests, and Seraiah was his royal secretary, which is a scribe charged with recording the official history of David's administration, including battle details, pacts and treaties with other nations, family genealogy, and to a degree, he was David's royal biographer. That's just a brief. We're still going down here, look. More administrative staff. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was in charge of the Kerethites and the Pelethites, foreign mercenaries, bodyguards loyal to David. And some of David's sons served as advisors and priests in his administration also. One thing I want to talk about here, though, is right here when it talks about Zadok and Ahimelech served as high priests. 2 high priests. David now had 2 high priests. Abiathar from Ithamar's line, which was not the priestly line. This can get confusing, but remember, I think it was the 2nd or 3rd chapter of Samuel when we first started this months ago. We talked about this priest wars. Remember Eli, who was the priest, who took on as his apprentice the boy Samuel? Eli wasn't even supposed to be a priest. Let's briefly explain why. Look at this little chart here. Remember, go back to the time of Aaron. You've got Moses, sister Miriam, brother Aaron. Aaron was the high priest, the first high priest. He had 4 sons. 2 of them were struck dead, stuffing around in the set-apart place, offering up strange incense, all that strange fire stuff. They were struck dead, so he had 2 sons left. The eldest was Eleazar. This was the only line that was to be high priest. Yeah? The only line that was to be high priest. And somehow along the line, there must have been some power play, some mafia priest wars going on, and it jumped. The high priest jumped to Eli, which is where we found the beginning of Samuel, 1 Samuel. Eli was the high priest. And he's not from this right line. He's from the youngest son, Ithamar. Not supposed to be, not according to Yahuah anyway. So, then time went on. Ahimelech was the guy that let David eat the showbread when he came along. Anyway, Saul slaughtered all them, remember? Slaughtered the whole tabernacle, everything. Priesthood, got rid of him, and then he had 1 son left, Abiathar. So this guy here, and Zadok, David's allowed 2 of them. Remember when he first brought the ark back, he bypassed all the religious freaks and just went and did it all himself. But now, to keep the tribes happy, to keep everybody, to try and bring the Turah back in and have an authorized priesthood, he's running with 2 high priests to start with, because Zadok was also the high priest down south, Judah, and Abiathar was the high priest that was accepted by Saul, because he'd come from Eli and it was just happening at the time. So let's read. I've probably doubled up on it. Zadok became a high priest, and he shared that duty with Abiathar. That's right. David had 2 high priests. This was purely a political accommodation that set aside the law of Yahuah on the matter. Abiathar was seen as the legitimate high priest by the northern tribes, but was not seen so by the south. So David appointed Zadok, which satisfied the people of Judah. Now there's 2. Now in reality, Abiathar was not a Yahuah authorized high priest. He's not, because look, wrong line. Because he came from the line of Ithamar. The high priest was supposed to come from the line of Eleazar. But since the time of Eli, Samuel's mentor, The high priest had come from the line of Ithamar, and thus this was the line of high priests that existed under King Saul. Zadok, on the other hand, came from the proper Yahuah established line of Eleazar. So there's a restoration happening, the true line. Zadok came from the proper Yahuah established line of Eleazar. And interestingly, after Solomon took over from his father, he put aside Abiathar, and Israel then finally had only one high priest, the one from the correct lineage, Zadok. So for now, David's utilising two, because remember, he's trying to bring the tribes together. He's now brought the tribes together, trying to keep the tribes happy. But when Solomon comes along, he's like, no, you're not right, get lost. Zadok is the one. So, interesting, these priest wars. If that's not a major stumbling block, what is? These guys were so caught up with their political positions, religious ordinances, and tradition that they miss. Look when they were trying to bring the ark back in, and people were struck dead because they didn't even know how to carry it, not even doing their job, didn't know the Turah, weren't teaching it. And so, of course, shoot forward another 1,000 years, they didn't even recognize the Messiah. So this whole power play is still going on today. Will they recognize him when he comes back the second time? Will they be interested? Or will they be too busy playing religion? Anyway, that's chapter 8 we've done today. David's pretty much conquered and taken over Israel. He's now the king, the sovereign of the promised land. He's achieved it. Yahuah has delivered him wherever he goes, and he's done it. Let's keep going on to chapter 9, because this whole idea of stumbling, not only is it going to end in a great article at the end, but this whole idea of behaviour that trips people over and causes you to judge and stumble and be a pain and a pest, it's going to carry on through this chapter as well. One day David said, "Is anyone from Saul's family still alive that I can show kindness to for the sake of my old friend Jonathan?" And Saul's household had a servant named Ziba. Saul's household's still going. Saul's dead, Jonathan's dead. In fact, all the sons are dead. But the household's still going, run by this servant. He's the top dog now. So he'd pretty much won the lottery, hadn't he? He'd won the lottery and now found himself at the top of the household pecking order, since all of Saul's family was now dead. So he's still running the show. It's not technically his to own, but he's running it. He can live how he wants. He's the boss of Saul's, who was the king, his whole household. So this guy Ziba, they brought Ziba to King David. "Are you Ziba?" "At your service, your majesty." "Is anyone from Saul's family still alive who I could show the kindness of Elohim to? Not just kindness for the sake of it, but to fulfill a vow he'd made to Jonathan long ago. He promised Jonathan that he would be kind and show favour to his children and to his descendants, because normally when there's a shift in reign, administration, or kings take over, you get rid of all the previous families so they're not a challenge. But David said he would not do that. He said he would look after them. So, is anyone from Saul's family alive who I can show the kindness of Elohim to? Well, Jonathan had a son who's still alive, but he's crippled and unable to use his feet. Interesting that he mentions that. Really? Where is he? He lives with Machir, son of Ammiel, at Lo-Debar. It was the murder of Abner. Who are we talking about? Jonathan's son. Remember, Jonathan had a crippled son? It was just mentioned briefly a couple of chapters ago, and then we went on to something else. Why was it mentioned? Because of this. Jonathan had a son, but he's crippled. It was the murder of Abner by David's commander Joab that led to the widespread panic that caused this tragic accidental crippling of Mephibosheth, and no doubt David learnt of it and probably felt some responsibility for it. Inherent in David's question about there being any survivors of Saul's family is, because he's not stupid, why is a foreign servant, why His question involves why a foreign servant would be in charge of his former king's substantial estate if there were indeed family members still living. Why are you the boss of this place if there's actually an heir? It is certainly to Saul's servant Ziba's advantage if there were no survivors, because his status as top dog would remain unthreatened. Even though Ziba is not so stupid to boldly lie to King David, he does quickly point out that while there is a survivor, he's a cripple. But why? What's the big deal about that? So what? This is interesting. I didn't know about all this. Mephibosheth is a cripple. Why would this servant of Saul's household running the show? Oh yes, I'm not going to lie, there is one, but he's a cripple. He's a cripple. In ancient times, cripples were seen as near worthless. They were a burden. And, barring some unusual circumstance, they usually wound up as street beggars in order to survive. A cripple could never hold a position of prominence or authority because he would be seen as unable to carry out the duties or to defend his position from people who would take it from him. The disabled weren't merely seen as having little use, they were actually despised. They were actually despised and looking down upon and they were looked down upon as undesirables, bordering on ritually unclean. In fact, we'll find several spots in the latter texts involving disabled people where Yahushua actually speaks out against the custom of the era that saw these unfortunate folks as little more than bugs to be stepped on. Even more, it was often believed that their disability was of divine doing, and so there must be something inherently distasteful about them that caused them to be cursed and rejected by Yahuwah in the first place. This is what the cultural mindset was. Wow. So Mephibosheth is automatically seen as cursed by Yahuwah and thus disqualified to be anything but a person to be ignored. Even though Mephibosheth had legal rights of inheritance as Jonathan's son, King Saul's only heir, here instead was an outsider, a Gentile servant, running Saul's estate due to no more than social customs, superstitions, and false beliefs that deemed it to be that way. So, Mephibosheth, a Benjamite, is being hidden from the Gibeonites by members of the Makir clan in the northern Transjordan. The Makir group was one of many who'd been fiercely loyal to King Saul, and so it's no surprise that they would offer sanctuary to Saul's grandson. So that's a little bit of backstory about the mindset of the cripple, how the people felt about cripples, and the fact that this guy is an heir to King Saul and his estate, but because he's crippled, he's been shelved, and this servant is running the show. Not doing anything wrong, but when he's called out on it, he definitely makes sure that David knows that, he's a cripple, So, David sent for Jonathan's son Mephibosheth and had him brought to Jerusalem from the house of Makir. And when he arrived, Mephibosheth laid face down on the floor and honoured the king, no doubt thinking his life is over. Mephibosheth, David asked. At your service, my king. There's no need to be frightened, for I intend to treat you kindly for the sake of your father Jonathan, who was a very good mate of mine. So I'll return to you all the territory that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always be welcome at my table. And Mephibosheth bowed himself again before the king. What am I to you, that the king should look with favour on a dead dog like me? I'm as one of your servants. Yeah, I talked about dog a few episodes ago. The lowest of lowest of the lowest. Filthy dog. That's how he sees himself. Not only is he going to live, Mephibosheth, not only is he going to live, but Saul's considerable estate is going to be turned back over to him. Even more, he's going to eat at David's table from here forward. And this is framed as a kindness to him for the sake of his father Jonathan, who David loved. Mephibosheth, a cripple, useless, who had earned nothing, looked down upon with hatred all of his life, is dumbfounded. In typical Oriental fashion, he asks why a dead dog such as himself should be accorded such unmerited privilege. A dead dog is merely an expression of great humility, of being the lowest of the low, the least worthy. And we can all understand feeling like that. Why? Why are you favouring me this way? I am nothing but a dead dog, the lowest common denominator, a nothing, a nobody. Then David summoned Ziba, who'd been Saul's servant and who had 15 sons and 20 servants himself. And he said to him, everything that belonged to his grandfather Saul and his family, I've returned to your master's descendant Mephibosheth. You, your sons and your servants will work on his farms and bring in his produce, so that he and his household will have food. But Mephibosheth will always eat at my royal table. I'm your servant, so whatever my master and king commands, I will do. David now turns to Ziba and tells him a new thing. The king's doing a new thing. The crippled and formerly useless Mephibosheth is now his master. And the estate is being given to Mephibosheth in the name of his former master, King Saul. Giving it all to Mephibosheth rather than allowing Ziba, who had maintained it for years, to remain in his possession is seen as righteous justice. How does David have the right to order such a thing? Because he's the king. Especially since Saul's estate had no current legal owner, because they're all dead, then it reverted to the monarchy. It was David's to do with as he pleased. He could have kept it for himself, but he didn't. Ziba had the benefit of running the place and reaping its rewards for some time, and now he would still do well for himself, but he would so under the ownership and authority of Mephibosheth. Ziba probably thought that this wasn't very fair or right, but this was the righteous judgment. And from then on, Mephibosheth ate at the king's table as though he were one of David's own sons. Mephibosheth had a young son, Micah, and all who lived in the house of Ziba became Mephibosheth's servants and worked for him. Mephibosheth remained in Jerusalem, where he always ate at the king's table. He was lame and could not walk on either foot. Interesting. Now, of course, and we'll just deal with this briefly, religion has taken this scripture and used it for its own ammunition. Let's briefly discuss the war in the Middle East. So, once again, religion uses these verses to fuel the age-old war of who the reign belonged to. The Jews say that they are legally entitled to use Israel because David restored the inheritance to Mephibosheth, Saul's rightful family heir. Christendom declares they've replaced the Jews because, as we'll see later coming up, David gives the inheritance back to Saul's Gentile servant Ziba out of anger for Mephibosheth, who apparently couldn't be bothered to show up, but sent offerings to David through his servant. It wasn't that he didn't show up, he was on his way and the servant rushed off ahead and lied about him. But what they don't state is that Saul's Gentile servant actually deceived King David and showed up with his master's gifts before Mephibosheth had a chance to get there. And when David realised he'd been lied to, he then split Saul's inheritance equally between Ziba and Mephibosheth, equally between the Jew and Gentile, Israel and the outsider, prophetically showing us that lineage and bloodline is irrelevant in the reign of Yahushua. It's not only for Jews, as they say, or only Gentiles, as religion's replacement theology states. It's not. That's why I'm briefly skimming past this, because it's just another useless argument. Yahushua is doing a new thing through a new blood covenant now. Same instructions, transformed and written on the tablets of our heart, making us the new dwelling place for his reign and his esteem. We are the set apart place of the portal, yeah? We are the divine promised land, yeah? Promised. The divine set apart promised land, soon to be transformed and consummated into the new Jerusalem, which will descend onto a new earth after Yahushua's second coming and judgment of fire. This brings us to the idea of the stumbling block. I mean, we had a cripple, a lame person, someone who's definitely couldn't get up. He was definitely disabled. Let's talk about this stumbling block, because of course it's all about behavior. In Hebrew, a stumbling block is to push over, slanderous, an obstacle, an enticement, specifically an idol, scruple, cause to fall, offense, nothing offered, ruin or grief. That's what a stumbling block will give you if you get into it. You'll end up with grief. In Romans 9, as Isaiah said before, if Yahuah of armies had not left us a seed, Yahusha, we would have become like Sodom, and we would have been made like Gomorrah. What shall we say then? That nations not following after righteousness have obtained righteousness, even the righteousness of belief? But Yisrael, following after the Torah of righteousness, has not arrived at the Torah of righteousness. They have shadow mixture. Why? Because it was not a belief, but as by works of Torah. For they stumbled at the stone of stumbling. They stumbled at the stone of stumbling, which of course is Yahusha. As it has been written, see, I lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock that makes for falling. And everyone who is believing on him shall not be put to shame. Interesting. Referring to the Jews, of course. We can see that the stumbling block for the nations is idolatry mixed with scripture. And everyone is controlled by the evil one, except those who choose to believe in the deliverance of Yahusha, as he conquered all of Satan's armies and weapons, even death. The greatest stumbling block to mankind is the truth of Yahusha. The greatest stumbling block to mankind is the truth of Yahusha. They keep stumbling over it. They can't escape it. Yeah? Which man can live by and overcome the wiles of Satan. If mankind rejects Yahusha, he will suffer greatly. That's what we see going on. That's what we see going on, guys. Stumbling everywhere. Look at social media. Look at what's going on in the body. It's complete stumbling. Nobody knows what's going on. They're at each other's throats. Nobody will let each other have it. Everybody's taking everything personally. That's why the 3 rules, Yahusha's given us 3 rules. Made it easy for us. Told us how inside ourselves to behave. So when we apply these 3 rules to ourselves, it stops us from stumbling at the behavior of others around us or online, enabling us to stay clear-minded, awake and rejoicing. There's a huge battle going on, guys. A huge war over your mind and your heart to keep you in distress. What was the word? To keep you in grief and in ruin. Cause you to stumble all the time. Looking at all the rat bags out there and carpetbaggers, causing you to stumble all the time. 3 rules. Let them have it. You're not responsible for them. You're not responsible for converting the world. You're not responsible for anything except your own behavior. That's where we need to come to, guys. And we need to throw off all the attack that's coming on us to keep us down, depressed, telling us we're nobody and we're nothing and nothing's going to work and nobody likes you, everybody hates you, da 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 da. It's all rubbish. It's from the evil one, and we need to arrest our thoughts and say no and go forward and rejoice. That's where we're coming to now in the behavior evolution. Rejoicing. Have a praise session. Start making some friends. Get a mate, like just be friendly and kind to people and see what Yahusha's going to do through it. That's enough for me today, guys. Don't be a stumbling block to other people, and definitely don't allow others to cause you to stumble. Yeah? 3 rules.